Autistic ghosting. Have you ever had an autistic person in your life just suddenly stop replying to messages and seem to disappear? Well, this is a relatively common phenomenon. It looks like ghosting, but actually something quite different is happening. Hi everyone, Paul Micallef here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So when someone stops replying to your messages and you're just getting radio silence, it feels like ghosting. It feels like they've just disappeared, they're ignoring you, they don't care about you, and you're just left hanging in the dark, not knowing what's going on. That can be a very confusing experience, so today let's explore what's actually going on the other side. In my relationship coaching work, I get quite a lot of female clients who met this amazing guy. They had a really special connection, really intense energy, but now for some reason he's just not responding anymore. What's going on? Is he cheating? That's the first natural question that a lot of people ask themselves. But when we dig into it a little bit more, the answer is pretty obviously no a lot of the time. When we try and be honest with ourselves, what these clients inevitably describe is a person who's really struggling with overwhelm. They're stressed, they're burnt out, they've got way too much on their plate. They're not coping, but more frustratingly, they're not even responding to text messages from a partner who's trying to offer help. So to try and understand this situation a little bit better, let's first look at what we typically call ghosting, and then contrast that with the very common autistic experience that seems to look a lot like that from the outside. Plus, at the end, I'll share the biggest mistake that I see people make. Actually, two big mistakes that almost everyone makes in this regard. So firstly, what do we typically mean by this word ghosting? For me, it's when a person I thought I had a good relationship with suddenly stops speaking to me for no reason. I remember a personal experience that happened to me not that long ago. I met someone interesting, we caught up in person, and we had like a 4-hour chat just going for a walk in the park. Clearly, there was a really significant connection there. And the very last thing she said as we were saying goodbye is, "Let's meet up again." So you can imagine my confusion when not long after that, there was just an unexplained radio silence. Now, I am a very direct person. I like to be direct. I like to be clear. I like to make sure that everyone is on the same page so that there's no misunderstandings. I'm probably all those things to a fault. So this incredibly unspoken, unclarified situation was incredibly confusing and upsetting to me. I just didn't understand what was going on, and my brain had no idea how to process the situation. So with a little bit more experience now, I've come up with a way to understand, for myself at least, why some people would do this. And the best way I describe it to myself is the difference between being direct and being indirect. I had previously always assumed that being direct was more clear. But actually, sometimes being indirect can be just as clear, so long as there's enough shared understanding. In this case, all my anxiety and stress about the situation could have been resolved in a simple text. Imagine I'd received the message very directly saying, "I'm sorry, I've got a lot going on at the moment. I really appreciated our connection, but I can't keep talking to you for reasons I can't explain." Now that's a relatively complex, nuanced message, which, if I'm honest, is well beyond what most people are capable of in terms of directness. So while that's how I like to communicate, this person effectively tried to send me the same message by consistently maintaining radio silence. And weirdly, if I keep messaging back more than 1 or 2 unanswered messages, then what I'm communicating is I haven't heard her message. And so inevitably she'll try to send it again with even more radio silence until I eventually get the message. So that's my understanding, at least, of this phenomenon that we typically call ghosting. The autistic version has a few elements that are significantly different. In the autistic community, it's relatively common to not hear from someone for months. And in this case, the message is more like, "Thanks for your message. I really want to respond to you. I really want to engage with you, but I don't have the energy for it right now. I wish I did have the energy because I like talking to you, but everything is too much and I really need to prioritize my energy, and this is just a bit of a distraction in my life at the moment. In fact, I've had my phone off for the last 3 days, just trying to clear my head a bit." And it can be very, very difficult for the neurotypical population to understand how someone could want to respond, want to maintain a relationship, and at the same time not be able to send a 2-second text just to check in to let the other person know that everything's fine. And this understanding probably makes the biggest difference. If I am confident about our relationship, there's no need to second guess what the other person is thinking. There's no need to imagine maybe they've changed their mind, maybe they don't want to talk to me anymore. Instead, it's a fairly safe assumption to assume everything is exactly like it was the last time we spoke in terms of our relationship, and that there must be another reason why responding to my text at the moment is not possible. And a big key to that is really getting a felt understanding of how hard it can be to send a 2-word text message. It can be impossibly hard. Imagine you had to write a 1,000-word persuasive, argumentative essay in a foreign language just so that your partner gets the message, I'm still here, I'm fine, I just need some time. That might sound like an exaggeration, but it's really not. When I have no executive function resources left, then even basic questions become almost impossible to answer. And behind the scenes, to answer that 2-second text, I need to ask myself, what do you want? Why are you reaching out to me? What do you need? What do I want? What do I need? How much energy do I have? How much do I want to push myself? If I try and explain my current situation to you, which I don't even fully understand myself, are you going to get it, or is it going to cause more confusion? With enough executive function resources, all of those questions get answered very quickly and intuitively. But when they don't, when each one of those questions is a massive chore, the most likely reaction to reading your text is going to be, okay, that's way too much for the moment. I'll put it on the never-ending to-do list and I'll look at it tomorrow. And surprise, surprise, tomorrow I still have a never-ending to-do list and your text message is not at the top of the list. One of the biggest challenges here is that most people don't understand most of the time. This whole difficulty with executive function that I've been trying to explain is not something that people just go, oh, yep, no worries, that's fine, completely get it. Imagine you were dating someone who is a single parent of 5 kids. If they didn't get back to you for a week and then said, sorry, I've been flat out, it's kind of easier to believe that that person has just a lot going on that they need to manage in their life. Whereas a person with executive function challenges, someone who's burnt out, stressed, overwhelmed, not coping, they might not have 5 kids, but they still need to figure out how to eat today and go to work and have a shower and maintain some semblance of mental health. And after all that, the additional task of trying to explain that to someone who's not quite getting it is probably going to feel too much. And even if you do get it, we are constantly expecting the world to not understand. A lot of autistic adults have been actively masking for decades. Even in a perfect relationship, it's difficult to undo all of that training. But it can happen, and that's actually my number 1 tip for dealing with this, which I'll elaborate on later. So finally, before we move on to the 2 biggest mistakes and your options for what to actually do in this situation, I want to mention one last important factor. Time is experienced differently depending on what's going on for you. If you don't hear a response for 5 minutes, is that a long time? What about 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months? The point at which people start worrying that something must be wrong is unique to the individual and the relationship. And I've noticed that a lot of autistic people are very focused when it comes to relationships. I don't connect with just anybody, which means when I make a genuine connection that I really appreciate, it doesn't just go away because we haven't spoken in 5 months. When I speak to my connection again, my brain assumes that no time has passed and that things are exactly the same. This can be a big problem when the other person has assumed that, well, they haven't heard from me, therefore something must have changed. And now we're living in completely different worlds where I think things are fine because nothing's changed, and they think things must be wrong because they haven't heard from me. And that is a very confusing experience on both sides. I'm genuinely surprised that you can start doubting our relationship when there's been no new evidence. Of course I still like you. Why would I not like you? That's almost insulting to suggest that just because I didn't remind you every 5 minutes. And that leads into the first big mistake that a lot of people make in this area, which is to try and get your partner to constantly remind you that your connection is still alive. If you're feeling that, in my experience, it's likely to be attachment based, and it's natural to try and push that burden onto the other person. I often hear people say things like, "Is it too much to ask to get a daily SMS in the morning saying I love you?" That's actually the wrong question to ask, because even if what you're asking is typical and no problem for most people, if it's not possible for your partner, then constantly asking is setting them up for failure. And when we compare someone's actions to the norm of the statistical population, then that leads to a cycle of blame, and all the responsibility gets pushed onto the other person because they should do what's expected of them in a typical relationship. Anyway, I'll come back to that attachment style in a minute. The second big mistake that I see people make with regard to reaching out again when you haven't heard anything is to refer to the previous text message. "Hey, I don't know if you got my message last week. I'm just asking if..." You see what I mean? By reminding the person immediately that you've been waiting for a week, they're likely to already feel bad about the situation. And when I ask people in a coaching context, do you want them to feel bad about this? The answer is usually, no, I don't want them to feel bad. I just want them to respond so I know what's going on. The catch is, though, that the worse they feel, the less likely they'll be able to respond. Okay, so they're 2 common mistakes. Let's look at 4 ways you can respond to this situation. The first way, and this almost always backfires, is to try and push for a response. You can think of this as the all or nothing strategy. You're playing poker, you're desperate, you've got no chips left, and you're going all in without even looking at your hand. It might work, but it probably won't. And even if it does get a response in the short term, you've probably damaged the relationship for reasons we'll see in a minute. Option number 2 is to just accept that it's going to take as long as it takes. I want to catch up with my friend. I know we will see each other eventually. I haven't heard anything in a couple of months. I'll send a check-in text just to see how things are going, but it might be a couple more months and there's nothing I can do about it. I just have to be okay waiting as long as it takes. That's not a bad strategy for friends and acquaintances, but if you're trying to build an intimate relationship, that's probably going to backfire too, unless you set yourself a time limit of how long you're willing to wait. The third option is to become a person of safety. And what I mean by that is to actively communicate that you are not putting any additional demands on the other person. I'm here to help you relax, whatever you need, but there's nothing that you can do that will be an inconvenience for me that I'll get annoyed at. This is a very effective long-term strategy, but it's also quite difficult to actually implement because most of the time, if we're honest, it's not actually true. We're accustomed to expecting certain things in return. And so it can be a very big psychological shift to really take a step back and remove all of those demands, even the demand of responding to this text. So what that looks like, and this is kind of the antidote to that common mistake of referring to the previous text message, is to say something like, "Hey, I hope you're doing okay. Just wanted to check in. Would you like whatever you think would be helpful that the other person has a reasonable chance of thinking is a good idea?" And then adding, "No need to respond to this text if you don't want to. I'm not even asking for a response. I'm making an offer with absolutely no demands." And the fourth option, and this is actually, ironically, usually the best first step in almost every situation, is to stop trying. It's quite a difficult step, especially if you really care about the relationship. But ironically, paradoxically, it's often the step that leads to the best chance of having a successful relationship in the long term. Because when I stop trying to connect with someone, I've inadvertently stopped putting demands onto that relationship. And I can then focus on being okay myself, which is a really great strategy in the long term. And coming back to the attachment style thing, a pattern that I regularly see is someone with an anxious attachment style. They meet someone, it's a really intense connection, they get so much attention, everything is really great, but that's only when you've got lots and lots of time and you're in person. And so outside of those times, the lack of attention, the lack of connection can really trigger that anxious attachment, that need for regular validation that your relationship is going well. And if that's happening, it's likely that this person cannot meet your attachment needs right now, especially if it's relatively early on in the relationship. So paradoxically, if you stop trying so hard to get that attachment set up, it's a win-win situation because suddenly now I'm focusing on my own needs and so I feel better, and the other person has less demands so they feel better, and therefore we're more likely to connect. Anyway, I don't know how long this video has gone on so far, but we should probably wrap up there for today. If you're interested to hear more about this, I made another video a little while back on understanding shutdown and withdrawal in relationships. I've also got a free download and optional email course on my website, literally called What to Do When He Won't Text Back, based on my life coaching work with dozens of clients in this area. So anyway, let's leave it there for today. As usual, please leave a comment if you can. I'd love to hear what you think. I'm curious to hear if you relate to this concept of autistic ghosting. So as usual, please leave a comment if you can. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you again next week. Bye.